Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia Kyoto. You can call me Cyber Hero Coach Cynthia. So I'm here today to talk about controlling group access with PIM in Microsoft Entra. Most organizations often have permanent assigned roles, permanent admin roles, or even access permissions stacking up. What about temporary projects? Temporary projects have ended but still have members of those groups having access to sensitive documents or resources within the organization. So this is what privileged identity management is for. Privileged identity management, the access of users, govern the access of privileged roles, groups, and Azure resources. Privileged identity management have the features of giving that just-in-time role activation and just enough access to avoid standing access of administrators or users. There's also an approval workflow in privileged identity management where approval can be required when a user is elevating to a role, and time-bound role assignments for duration. Let's say we have vendors working in the organization for 3 months. A group can be created with time-bound role assignments set for the start date and end date of the project. With privileged identity management, multi-factor authentication can also be enforced on the user when the user is elevating a role. If the user has already signed in using multi-factor authentication, while the user is trying to elevate to a role in PIM, the user would not be requested to enforce MFA again. So you can decide to use conditional access integrate with authentication context and authentication strength to ensure that users are requested to conduct another authentication, a higher authentication, while elevating to a role in PIM. You can also create justifications for access requests for auditability to be able to check the reasons why this user is requesting for that role at that point in time. And there's audit log to give you that visibility of activities carried out by these roles, groups, and resources. PIM can be used in managing Entra roles like your security administrator role, SharePoint administrator role. It can also be used for managing Azure resources at any scope or level, either the subscription level, the resource group level, and also managing groups. PIM can be used to manage M365 groups and Entra security groups as well. The focus for today is on groups, PIM for groups. Why do we need PIM for groups? PIM for groups can be used to govern access to Entra roles, Azure resources, Microsoft Intune, and even third-party software applications. PIM for groups can also help you create that consistency as well. Assuming you have a group that needs to be assigned several roles at the same time, instead of creating those roles individually, you can easily assign those roles into a group and assign the members to that group for consistency and for easy manageability as well. The license required for PIM, you have to have the Microsoft Entra ID Premium P2 license or the Microsoft Entra Identity Governance license. You can manage non-role assignable groups in PIM and also role assignable groups using privileged identity management. Privileged identity management cannot be used to manage synchronized group from on-prem to the cloud, and it also cannot be used to manage dynamic groups. So the group has to be assigned groups and not dynamic groups. What are non-role assignable groups? Non-role assignable groups are groups that do not have Entra roles assigned to them. So these are just normal groups. It can be an IT department, a department like the marketing department M365 group, or the marketing department security group without Entra roles assigned to it. To manage non-role assignable groups using PIM, there are some permissions required, And the permissions required are the identity governance administrator or directory writer, the group administrator, user administrator, or the owner of the specific group can manage the groups. But there's something I would like to point out here. Non-role assignable groups managed using PIM can also be bypassed. So the PIM settings, some group administrators scoped at either the admin unit level or the exchange administrators can bypass the settings of PIM and change the credentials of active members. So I would like to draw this out here that despite the non-role assignable groups are managed using PIM, some other roles with group management can bypass the settings of PIM. This draws me now to PIM for role assignable groups. PIM for role assignable groups can be used to manage groups that manage maybe a group for sensitive resources or sensitive documents. So it's best to create a role assignable group and manage those groups using PIM. Another thing I have to state here is that if a group has to be assigned to a Microsoft Entra role, that group has to be a role assignable group before it can be managed using PIM. In order to manage the group management and permission of role assignable groups in PIM, you have to either be a privileged role administrator, a global administrator, or the group owner of that specific group. So the reason why I will call these role assignable groups for PIM has extra protection compared to non-role assignable groups managed under PIM, because other admins would not be able to bypass PIM settings for these role assignable groups. The next thing I want to talk about are common mistakes to avoid when configuring privilege identity management for groups, especially for sensitive groups. It's always advisable to enforce either multi-factor authentication or conditional access using authentication context for managing these sensitive groups. Assigning non-role assignable groups to be managed using PIM. Do not forget to take note of the privileges of other group admins that can bypass the settings of PIM, like the exchange administrator or even authentication administrators scoped at the administrative unit level. The fact that PIM is also managing activities and visibility of roles, resources in your tenants does not mean you have to overlook monitoring as well. Check for audit group changes, logs to be able to monitor these groups, especially non-role assignable groups where other admins can bypass the settings of PIM. With this, I will say privileged access groups, or as it is called now, PIM for groups, are the future of role assignment at scale because it's smart, auditable, and zero trust aligned. You can easily manage groups at scale for consistency, for auditability. So let's check out how to configure groups using privileged identity management.